Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Bringing Thermal Energy Networks to Local Neighborhoods, Cost-Effective Decarbonization for Economic Development in New Jersey, presented by the Newark Alliance, NIOP New Jersey, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, Rethink Energy New Jersey, and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Today's focus will be on how thermal energy networks are able to accelerate the rate of decarbonization at scale rather than building by building, which will in turn reduce costs by stacking projects and benefits. Local thermal networks will also take demand off of the grid and provide opportunities for targeted economic development while providing a positive net present value as a decarbonization tool. This webinar will focus on neighborhood-scale decarbonization using case studies directly from professionals working on current projects. These projects are transitioning street segments, mixed-use developments, or entire neighborhoods off of a dependence on fossil fuels using thermal energy networks as a decarbonized energy source, along with highly efficient electric appliances. Thermal energy networks connect otherwise separate parts of a city in order to utilize waste heat or ambient temperatures, such as from a data center, a local body of water, wastewater systems, or from geothermal bores. Following the speakers, we will discuss the opportunities for implementing thermal energy networks here in New Jersey. Our response panel includes David Zimmer, Executive Director of the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, John Rotolo, Chief Engineer with the Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission, Melissa Miles, Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and Dan Kennedy, CEO of NIOP New Jersey. First, we will have presentations by Adam Shelly, Director of Innovation and Project Development at Ecosystem Energy, Aaron Miller, Eastern Regional Manager at SHARC Energy, Debbie New, Coordinator at Vermont Community Thermal Networks, Jared Rodriguez, Principal at Emergent Urban Concepts, and starting us off will be Jonathan Thompson, VP and Head of Energy at the New York City Economic Development Corporation.
Jared, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Thompson. I'm the head of energy for the New York City Economic Development Corporation, that's EDC for short. If you don't know who EDC is, we are a quasi-city agency, some call us, but we're actually a nonprofit, and our only client is the city of New York. We have the authority to administer the leases for about 40 million square feet of city-owned property. And with that, the energy team here that I work with, they're all just behind me, we are in charge of the energy modernization and decarbonization strategy for the entire portfolio. With this unique ability for us to both plan infrastructure as well as lead new energy projects, we can often pilot, de-risk, scale new energy systems, including utility thermal energy networks in collaboration with the community as well as the utilities. There are several campus-like properties within our portfolio. You can see that from this map, we have several properties that are very much waterfront and also clusters of properties which lend well to thermal energy networks and shared loads. We have 3 projects that we're currently developing concepts for right now for thermal energy networks, one in Teleport in Staten Island, another in Hunts Point in the Bronx, and another in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. I'm going to focus on Sunset Park today because we have moved on to what is a phase 2 for our study of the thermal energy network in Sunset Park. We had actually completed phase 1 in 2023, and that included the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which is somewhat of our flagship property. It's a little over 4 million square feet of manufacturing and industrial space. Which is also right next to the Brooklyn Wholesale Meat Market, which is a refrigerated warehouse offering year-round waste heat potential from there. The study also leaned on a previous piece of work that was done by the Department of Environmental Protection, where they evaluated all 14 of the city's wastewater plants and the potential waste heat from the effluent outfall of all of these plants and what that could mean in terms of capturing that waste heat resource. And so because that information was already available and it was actually quite nearby, just across what is also city property, the 65th Street Rail Yard from Brooklyn Army Terminal. We use that as an asset in developing our initial study. The goal was to leapfrog technologies in terms of heating and cooling, whereas Brooklyn Army Terminal and the wholesale meat market were currently operating on unitary systems, DX cooling, as well as gas-fired heating, hot water heating throughout. These systems were not centrally controlled. There was also often simultaneous heating and cooling. It was largely inefficient and also did not fit in line with the city's overall strategy towards decarbonization and electrification. And so this concept that we developed in phase one included an ambient loop between buildings A and B of Brooklyn Army Terminal, connection through from a primary loop at the effluent outfall of the Owl's Head wastewater treatment plant to Brooklyn Army Terminal, as well as the wholesale meat market, allowing us to share waste heat to balance those loads and integrate that waste thermal resource as well, moving towards a modern system that was efficient, decarbonized, as well as low an impact on our utilities and our electrical load as possible. The study was technically very rigorous, very heavy in terms of specs, components, the actual details of the system. But what it didn't provide in good enough detail to move this forward effectively was really a strategy of how we actually deliver this project, how anyone makes effective decisions from a strategic standpoint. Another thing that we found too is that with the total annual loads of the Brooklyn Army Terminal and the wholesale meat market, we were only using a little over half of the total annual capacity of waste heat from that Owl's Head plant. So for the large capital expenditure of that utility infrastructure, we were not utilizing that waste heat well. And so there was an obvious need to expand this project from the phase one scope towards something that broaden both the boundaries, the physical boundaries of it, but also the informational boundaries of what it is that we were solving for. And so we moved towards a phase two study that we had actually kicked off just a few weeks ago, and this expanded the boundary of both the potential off-takers and different adopters of the system, leveraging our property that's up at Bush North, as well as private off-takers, including NYU Langone, that was just across the street from the wholesale meat market, but also including other thermal sources such as river water exchange and geo exchange at the rail yards. And so this broadening of the physical scale allows us to introduce different thermal sources, to allow us to evaluate different loads and better optimize this system and provide potentially overall benefit in terms of the financial value of this. But what we needed to solve for in order to really make this commercially deliverable was, what is the value of the system to the city? What are the financing pathways? How do we pay for this system? What's the governance structure, considering all of these different entities that would be involved in this, including DEP, EDC, the mayor's office, the PSC, utilities, private off-takers, and then what is the roadmap, the implementation roadmap? How do you deliver this in terms of the different development timelines of all of these different entities that would be involved? And then what's the value to anyone who isn't an initial, say, champion of the system, but someone that would like to connect, but needs to understand what it means for them in terms of dollars and emission savings. And then at the end, what's the scalability of this? As I said, this is one property of many that we have, these clusters of both city-owned assets, but also just potential in terms of shared resources. How do we create a framework that allows us to take this model and apply it elsewhere throughout the city? And so we saw in this that coalition building is really the key to all of this. We have broken this project up into what we view as three tiers or three different groups of stakeholders. At the top, the zone of critical influence would be the champions, and that would be city agencies, the state agencies, elected officials, all of the decision makers that we would need to have aligned to make this project move forward. Below them would be the implementers, the utilities, the ESCOs, the HVAC technology companies that would help us with the actual development of this project, the technologies that would be included, and then the final group would be the adopters. Not that they are the last group, they are just as important as any other group within this project. Without the off-takers, there is no thermal energy network. So bringing the value of this to them, having their buy-in from the beginning, is immensely important. But before we actually go to them, before we get to them within this project, it's really having an understanding of the needs and the kind of decision pathways of the other levels that we need to have understood before we go to them and say, this is a real project and this is how it's going to get done and this is the value to you. Is this something that you can align your development with? And so, as I mentioned,
1 minute, Jonathan, 1 minute left.
Oh, sure. So as I mentioned, there's information needed at all these different levels in order for any of these decision makers to make an effective and successful decision. And so with the champions, they need to know what the public value is, the policy alignment, the funding for this project. Implementers need to know what is the rate of return for themselves, risk allocation, and also the clarity between operations and ownership throughout the project. And also the adopters, as I mentioned, what's the value to them, the emissions impact, especially in light of Local Law 97. And so because of the complexity of this project, we're evaluating a number of ways of developing this. We're evaluating different delivery methods and financing pathways, including public-private partnerships, public ownership, third-party concessions for operating the common infrastructure, energy as a service partnership likely for end-use tenant space fit-outs, and as well as I mentioned with the financial stack, public-private partnerships, ESCOs, and utilities as maybe infrastructure owners for that common infrastructure. And then ultimately what we want to get to is a replicable, financeable framework for thermal energy networks that can be scaled throughout the city, providing that shared public-private value. So we're hoping to wrap up this project at the end of this year with an RFP going out to design this fall for the initial infrastructure. Hopefully this project, and the goal of this project again, is to develop that framework that closes that governance gap, that unlocks that financial capital, and then also enables this very important neighborhood scale decarbonization pathway. And that is everything for me. Barb, I think you're on mute if you're trying to.
Yeah.
All right, you can introduce the rest of the panel. We jumped right in, and so I'll let you take over. Thank you.
All right, so just sharing my screen for Debbie New from Vermont Community Thermal Networks. Debbie, if you want to take it away.
Sure. So at Vermont Community Thermal Networks, we focus on education, advocacy, and community organizing around TENS. And we're finding that even in smaller scale cities and towns, TENS can fit in with and support many local priorities, especially when projects are locally driven. So I'm going to quickly share some of the ways we help people understand and explore TENS locally. So first slide, if it's available.
Yep.
But I'll just keep talking. So it would actually be the second slide right now. So we often start with the fact that, especially in the Northeast, heat is a precious resource. We spend a lot of time, effort, and money trying to make heat, move it, and save as much of it as we possibly can. But we're already producing a lot of heat that we're not using. And what about cooling? And the rapidly increasing electric demand for cooling. We have a much better chance of meeting our cooling needs with less electric demand when we embrace TENS. We can have heating and cooling that uses local resources and supports many local goals by using ground source heat pumps. So this is where we explain to people that these kinds of heat pumps really are the building blocks of thermal energy networks. We explain how they compress and reject temperature to heat and cool like air source heat pumps, but with water and moderate temperatures by using energy that comes from the ground. And we explain that's why it's called geothermal energy in many cases. But we emphasize it's not just about temperature from the ground. We also really try to help people understand the opportunity with wastewater, and Aaron is going to talk more about that in a little bit. But we can access heat from wastewater at the building, at sewer lines, and at the gold mine that's a wastewater treatment plant. We also talk about waste heat from buildings, especially from large refrigeration systems, from any kind of cooling that has to happen inside, and reject heat outside from supermarkets, ice arenas, and large buildings. So we show what it can look like in a town where under the town green, there can be a geothermal bore field that you don't even see once it's been drilled and it's been seeded and covered over. We show a grocery store that's contributing its waste heat to the network, and a lot of different kinds of buildings where their wastewater can contribute heat into the network. So we help people understand that TENS use heat that already exists across a community, in many cases has already been paid for and would otherwise be discarded. We also talk about how it can be shared efficiently. And this is really key to the benefits of TENS. We explain that air source heat pumps have to work a lot harder at very cold temperatures and hot temperatures and use more electricity. Now we make sure we know people understand that air source heat pumps are important to our electrification goals and they're complementary to other technologies. They have a really important role in what we're trying to accomplish. But with ground source heat pumps, they use moderate temperatures. In many places, it's about 50 degrees underground that we can access and use. And if we're using waste heat, those temperatures can be even closer to what we want to stay comfortable inside. So that high efficiency translates into energy savings, from which flow a lot of cost savings, and that all translates into many community benefits. Some of the top ones that are particularly important to many of the communities we're working with are economic development, downtown revitalization, and affordable housing. When we can hang on to energy dollars and invest them locally, we can do a lot more in our communities and for our communities. And I'll just pause here to see if we want to catch the slides up. Move them along. Yeah, right there is great. Thank you. So we explained it's not just about communities benefiting from TENS, it's also about them having agency. Next slide. So thermal energy networks as shared infrastructure, much like water and wastewater systems, mean that thermal energy is actionable locally in a way that the electric grid just isn't. And that's empowering for people. They can do something and they can direct it to get the most out of it for their community. Next slide. And next slide after that. So we've created a toolkit to help people understand how they can develop TENS where they make sense locally. It's divided into about 4 sections. The first is called Start Here, which is about local conditions that could be good opportunities for a TEN. Identify Opportunities is a lot about site selection, but also whether or not you're ready to launch a TEN, how to lay the groundwork for one. Understanding Ownership looks at 3 basic business models: municipal, cooperative, and third party, and related financing opportunities. And Develop Your Project is something we like to call what to expect when you're expecting a thermal energy network. And keep the slides moving if possible. A lot of what's in the toolkit informs our community workshops, where we're focused on essentially 3 questions. What's already happening here? Where could this work? And who's needed? And Jonathan talked about this a bit. We focus particularly on enlisting local champions that can move a project forward and middle agents like regional planners and town officials who are already working at the levels where change is happening. Our goal is not so much about technology and feasibility, but about identifying an approach that's acceptable locally to help ensure a successful project. So I just want to check in on the slides because I'm seeing that people are wanting to see next slides. So we're at maybe I could give you the slide number, slide 16, if possible. In other words, what we're doing is relying on local knowledge and relating to local goals, which almost always relate directly to economic development and are probably similar to the goals that you're working on where you are. So let's take a look at one of those goals, which is how municipal thermal energy networks can accelerate housing development, especially in our urban cores, where supported by shared infrastructure. So we already know that thermal energy networks are most cost-effective in areas with greater density and with a variety of thermal energy resources. They make sense where we need to add density anyway and can contribute to smart growth goals that we're already working on. They can also lower housing and electrification costs because developers don't necessarily have to include heating, cooling, and hot water systems in construction costs. That can be funded as part of the network. When indoor equipment can be bundled into TEN's project costs, it's less expensive for developers to build, and we can provide efficient heating and cooling to more people, making energy more affordable for residents and businesses. Specifically, the entire trench can be eligible for tax incentives when thermal pipes can be incorporated into trenches already planned for water and sewer. And lower overall costs can incentivize developers when HVAC equipment can be financed as part of the network. Developers also don't have to have responsibility for maintenance and operations when TENs are locally owned and managed. As we know, water and sewer systems are public infrastructure that have many benefits. Municipalities install these systems and provide these services already. They have access to lower cost capital, which covers upfront costs, and customers paying regular bills cover that debt service and fund operation and maintenance. We understand how to do that. In fact, we set up cities and towns in many ways to do this for us. Next slide. So thermal energy networks are similar shared infrastructure. In fact, the economics are possibly better as the water does not need to be treated as intensively as for potable water and wastewater. Next slide. We can do more with thermal energy networks when we coordinate and plan. So working TENs into planning means we're more likely to have the time and local buy-in needed to include them in projects, and we can start small and start now. We can have some TENs in place, making it easier to phase in more buildings and add thermal energy networks as we build and retrofit our housing stock over time. Last slide. So not only is heat a precious resource, but we also have the heat we need and opportunities to harness it, particularly for housing and related development. I understand that in New Jersey, you're really good at transit-oriented development, in fact, among the best states in the country, which is an important opportunity to use TENs as a tool to do more of what's already familiar and in large part you already know how to do. That's it.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much, Debbie. We're going to move on. I think that Jared is doing the slides, but now has no audio. So we will keep going. And Adam Shelly. Adam is the Director of Innovation and Project Development for Ecosystems Energy, and he has some pretty large-scale projects to tell us about.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Jared, feel free to text me if you want me to say anything in your behalf. I'm sure you'll say that we're all doing a great job. But so yeah, I'm Adam Shelly. I'm with Ecosystem Energy. We're a group of engineers that really are held accountable for our results. And so what does that mean? We're an integrated engineering and construction company in New York. We focus a lot on building systems, energy efficiency, decarbonization. And we also do a lot of district and campus setting work, including thermal energy networks. So why is that relevant here? So the projects that we're working on, two of them in New York City with Con Edison, include Rockefeller Center and the Chelsea neighborhood. And so I want to sort of explain how that could apply to the different municipalities, developers, organizations here in New Jersey. We're based in New York City. I'm based in Jersey City, so I'm sort of like a day walker. But I just want to start by drawing a quick contrast. In New York, we're actively developing these thermal energy networks with Con Ed, they're a regulated investor-owned utility, obviously. So it's much different for them. But in contrast, New Jersey communities can do this as well. But they're working with a different operating framework, as was mentioned earlier. So the infrastructure landscape is more decentralized in New Jersey, but that doesn't mean the opportunity is smaller, even if the Rockefeller Center and those associated buildings are a lot larger. Next slide, Jared. Oh, hi. Oh, no, you got it. So the key here is the neighborhood scale thinking. It unlocks a fundamentally different way to design and develop this energy infrastructure. It allows the neighborhood to sort of pull together those load profiles, capture and reuse the waste heat from anywhere, and diversify the thermal resources. So if you're producing heat or if you're taking heat, you can be a participant in these thermal energy networks. That can come from anywhere, from heating, cooling, wastewater, data centers, industrial, a lot of other places. But importantly, these thermal energy networks are not products. They're not off-the-shelf components. These are systems. It's a framework. It's an approach to optimizing and integrating the energy resources that are already present. So if you think you're going to go to one engineer and say, I got to buy a thermal energy network, that's not quite how it's going to work. You're going to have to work with a number of different stakeholders, as was talked about earlier, to engage in finding the best solution for you. Next slide, Jared. I'm going to try to move quickly so we can catch up a little bit. So when a lot of people think about energy networks, thermal, they think about geothermal with the deep wells in the ground. It's not just that. It's anything. Air source heat pumps are included, solar thermal, residential, industrial. I want to name everybody on this call so that they feel included, but I don't know everyone on this call. But I can assure you, you're included if you're producing heat or taking heat at some point in your life. So really think outside the box. I know different industries, different groups push different technologies. There's different applications to it. Different towns will have different pros and cons depending on what resides in your town. But really everything is on the table. Next slide. Thanks. So I want to talk a little bit more about the build or the projects that are being designed in Manhattan. So this is Rockefeller Center. Importantly, none of this is done with any geothermal, and none of this is done with any air source. All of this project, and it's heat only, is done through heat recovery of the buildings. I know I mentioned the Truman Show earlier. I'll mention 30 Rock here and SNL. A lot of shows are recorded in 30 Rock. And all of that heat is now going to be pumped into those adjacent buildings for domestic hot water and heating hot water. So it's a really powerful project that has the ability to save not only GHG, but a lot of money for the different customers, and also be a money producer for that thermal resource for 30 Rock. And that's a huge distinction because it's not just the cash flow is not a one-way street. Everybody can get involved as a buyer or as a seller, depending on the criteria for that particular system. So what do we do on the project? We're taking on everything from sort of the stakeholder management, phasing through the construction of the crowded streets. We're crossing 6th Avenue. There's a lot of complication to it. We're hoping that gets approved and built by the state. The design is going in shortly, but it's a really great opportunity. Next slide. Here's Chelsea. On the left is a data center, or it's a large commercial building with a data center in it, I should say. And then there's a NYCHA housing project on the right-hand side, and that's doing heating and cooling, and we're building a new thermal energy loop there. So that's a project on its own, and both of these have the potential to scale up because they're pilots. And so if that pilot is successful, they'll obviously build out more and connect more buildings and more customers. A couple of key takeaways on this. Working with the regulated utility obviously adds complexity, but it also adds structure. And I was thinking a little bit about what Jonathan said earlier. The structure is helpful. It helps create governance models, cost allocation rules, to define different requirements and characteristics that you'll have during design and during construction, but also during operation and expansion, because there's a lot of different factors. The stage gate process is really helpful in establishing this, sort of moving from that feasibility to concept to design to implementation. It's essential. So it's tempting to rush to a preferred technology, but you have to resist that urge. You really have to look around you and say, where are my assets and what sort of heat are they giving off and taking? So, I know I mentioned Jersey City in New York. I'm originally from Philadelphia, so I always like to tell people you got to trust the process. It's very relevant today with the NBA draft. So you have to trust that process. It goes a little bit slower, but it's important not to cut those steps early on during design and development. Next slide. I'll skip that one. Let's go to the next one. Let's do one more. I think I lost track. Oh, we're burning through this. This is great. How does this apply to New Jersey? Everyone on this call. So we see a really strong opportunity in that MUSH market, the municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, because they tend to own multiple buildings with various loads, and they tend to have capital planning cycles that will align with energy investments. So we think that's a really strong market for New Jersey. They're also mission driven in a way where it can support those long-term decarbonization goals. So the well-structured thermal network across a town campus, some of those smaller towns, or something with a school or a hospital, I think are really good, easy targets to really focus on. Next slide. So I haven't talked a ton about money. And why is that? It's because the economics aren't always obvious, and they're always very personal to that thermal energy network that you're designing. You have to stack up all the different potential value for a project. That obviously includes tax credits and incentives, but it also includes all the operational savings that the different customers might have. If someone's building a large building and they can avoid adding a chiller or a boiler, that's a lot of value for that particular customer. So you've got to be able to identify that and bring that into the value stack of the thermal energy network. Avoiding stranded assets is important. And most importantly, we're all here evangelicals of thermal energy networks on this call, but it's really important to keep in mind that sometimes thermal energy networks are just not the answer, and that's okay. It's all part of the energy mix that every single community, every single state has to identify and develop what works best for them on the town level, the neighborhood level, all across everything. Obviously, some communities are better suited for solar. I think people in the Northeast are not as well suited for solar as compared to the Southwest. I don't think that's really an opinion, even though I said it, I think that's a fact. So just be aware the economics aren't always obvious, but there are good people around who can help advance it and help sort of flush out that potential and screen those opportunities. Next slide. Great. I hope I move quickly enough. Jared, are we answering this question now, or should I touch on it later? Later. Got it.
We're going to come back to you.
I think Aaron is going to share his slides directly. Correct, Aaron?
That's correct.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you.
You got it.
Okay. Oh, we can hear you, Jared.
Yes.
Okay.
So, hi, I'm Aaron Miller. I'm with SHARC Energy. We're a wastewater energy transfer company. And you'll hear people talk about heat capture, but it's actually heat source, heat sink. We're pushing and pulling energy in and out of the waste stream, just like you would for geothermal. So if you'd like, I can go to my full screen. So I'll make it a little bit bigger for everyone. So just want to demonstrate the value of wastewater. As you can read faster than I can read it to you, the DOE is estimating there's 350 million megawatt hours of energy wasted every year. Just to put in some local context, New York City DEP handles 1.3 billion gallons of wastewater a day. The rule of thumb is 1 million gallons a day equals 1 megawatt of thermal transfer. So New York City alone is flushing more than half of Indian Point's total capacity on a daily basis. So the great thing is to bring this to New Jersey, it's like, yes, we were talking about, you hear Debbie was talking about it, and Jared about scalability. We can work with you at a building level all the way up to a municipal level. And even if you have a small lift station that handles 5 million, medium-sized lift station that handles 5 million gallons a day, that's 5 megawatts that you're just otherwise wasting. This is a resource that's available, and we're just asking you to, what we're doing is we're capturing it, interfacing with it momentarily, and sending it on its way. And the reason why, if it'll advance, we have so much hot water is because people like me take 2 screaming hot showers every day. It doesn't matter what time of year. So we have really consistent energy source. So the average temperature coming out of a multifamily residential building is around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's year round. So winter, spring, summer, fall, it does not matter. So what our technology does is we can take that 70-degree wastewater or the 50 to 80 degree if it's in the municipal sewer, and then again, use it to make potable hot water for a building or to do complete heating, cooling, hot water production for a building based on the amount of wastewater that's available to us. And the differentiating factor between our technology is the fact that, as you can see here, we can work with black and gray water within a building envelope. So there's no odor, no cross contamination. So again, multifamily residential building, we're tapping into that primary sanitary pipe just before it leaves the building, putting it into a tank. It acts as our thermal battery. And then with that energy, we can do all sorts of things. Again, heating, cooling, and hot water production, just like you would with a standard heat pump. So we have 2 boxes essentially, and with variations on a theme within each. The key is really scalability. This Piranha is a small heat pump. I don't know why this is a fancy thing. This is a small heat pump. I'm gonna turn this off here. We have our smallest unit is in a 37 unit apartment building in Boulder, Colorado. We're providing 100% of the domestic hot water, just simply capturing the wastewater before it leaves the building. The rule of thumb is if you give us 100% of the wastewater before it leaves an apartment building, we can provide you with 91% of that domestic hot water load. It's almost a completely circular economy. So it's very similar to solar thermal in that regards. And as you can see here, I just wanted to show you the in the middle, in the white, all these market sectors make a lot of hot water waste and need a lot of heating, cooling, and hot water to match. So again, it's that finding the right mix of diverse assets. And if you have a neighborhood, like I said, with a lift station or a commercial laundry or a microbrewery, what have you, you can use that actually as an energy source, a hub for a thermal microgrid. And again, as we've been talking about, you'll hear us talking about repeatability, scalability. We understand that thermal energy networks are fantastic, but they take time to develop. So it's aim small, miss small. Pick off what you can, and then just continue to add to that mix. And I want to just walk you through some success stories. These 3 are focused in New York, obviously, as you can see, in various stages of development. Amalgamated housing is a low to moderate income housing up in the Bronx, and we're in the process of designing a system to capture all the wastewater before it leaves the building, to provide roughly about 85% of the domestic hot water for those buildings. And it's a campus, so this is phase 1. Phase 2, phase 3 will add more buildings onto it, and will also incorporate geothermal. So again, it will scale up in a way that makes sense from a financial and from a civil standpoint. Whitney Young Manor, real quick, is a complete overhaul of LMI housing. And this is a fascinating project because it takes a village. There is no one silver bullet. So we're going to be part of air source heat pumps and other a new facade and new hydronics throughout the entire building. And what's really neat is they're actually excavating out the ground because the sanitary pipe that takes all the sanitary from these 2 buildings out to city sewer runs 4 feet below the foundation. So they're going to excavate out the foundation to create a wet well to act as that thermal battery. Really fascinating project. And the Alafia project, which is up and running right now, and we're accepting tours, is a again multi-phase project. The first phases are these 2 buildings right here, Alafia C1, C2, which is two towers. 2 towers with a common sanitary output, and then a smaller building across the walkway, which has 2 piranhas in it. We are using a mix of geothermal and wastewater energy transfer to maximize the thermal capacity and efficiency of the heat pumps in these buildings. So one of the great things about, I'm really sorry about these slides advancing. interesting when we looked at the original model for C1, C2, these two big towers here. They were, the designer, Salis O'Brien, was saying, hey, we'll put the SHARC in to do heat recovery to make hot water and heating for the building. It turns out actually by putting the SHARC in to pick up the peak cooling loads, because it's passive house design, very, very cooling dominant, we were able to let the geo designer right-size the geo field from 125 boreholes down to 93. So that's a massive first cost savings, over $500,000 on first cost savings. And now moving forward, we'll use the sanitary to temper the loop, the ground loop, to keep it in that ideal 68 to 82 degree temperature range throughout the year to maximize, again, the efficiency capacity of the heat pumps connected to the loop. So you'll get the OpEx savings over the next 15, 20, 25 years. So it's a win-win all around. And the other thing I wanted to point out as I move through these slides is, as flexible as our technology is with regard to connecting it to the mechanical and plumbing systems of said buildings, there's also flexibility in how you finance these projects. This is a privately owned, heavily incentivized project, private owner, private developer, and they're going to be owner and operated, but they're leaning heavily on Con Ed clean heat incentives. And I know that our technology qualifies for the clean heat and heat pump incentives in New Jersey, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act investment tax credit. So again, this is a rendering of the whole campus. They're eventually just going to build out these pods one at a time and then interconnect the entire campus with an ambient loop. Another really successful district project out in Vancouver, and I want to move through these pretty quickly because I know we're short on time. This is a standalone utility. It only takes money from the off-takers connected to the loop. So they don't take any incentives, no outside monies. And again, started out originally as 2 SHARC 880s. We've now expanded it to 5. And phase 3 is going to include this additional phase here in the city. So we're going to go from 3.2 megawatts to 10 to roughly 30 megawatts. Right now, we're providing 180 degree of hot water for 23 million square feet of mixed use space. They're going to 10x that in the next 5-6 years. So again, scalable, and all we're using is the wastewater that's passing by in the municipal sewer line. So it's an untapped resource that we're leveraging.
Hey, one more
National
minute, Aaron, if you can.
Yep. Okay. Well, then let me get to, I wanted to show this slide because I want to show that thermal energy networks can be financially viable. This is Lelum out in a privately owned system out in Vancouver, and brand new, all new construction. This one system right here, our baby SHARC, the SHARC 660, is providing all of the energy needed to support an ambient loop to do heating, cooling, and hot water for this entire campus. And as you can see, there's a lot of extra space in the building. And these wastewater holding tanks, the batteries that feed the system, are 3 times larger than they need to be for phase 1. But because we have the ability to plan out for the future, economically made sense to build in the infrastructure so that we can over time add more on. And what's wild is this project, the whole thing, soup to nuts, the energy plant costs $8 million total. So as you can see here, faster than I can read it to you, it costs the operator about $8,000 a month to operate the system. So what ends up happening is everybody connected on the loop pays a $20 flat fee, whether you're a supermarket or an individual homeowner. $20 is all you pay. You still pay your individual electric bill, but the $20 supports the ambient loop. It costs them about $4 to support that loop on a monthly basis, excuse me. So they're taking that additional $16, banking it in a revolving green fund to help build out the future phases. So again, here's an opportunity where it makes sense financially and you can scale it and repeat it over and over again. So I'm really happy to do a deep dive with anybody who wants to learn about how we do the wastewater energy transfer, but I'm really just thrilled to bring this technology to New Jersey and show you that you can we can do this at a building level and at a neighborhood level and even at a citywide level. So really, really happy and excited to be here. So thank you for your time.
All right. Geez. Can everyone see my screen? Yes? Say yes if you could see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Wow. All right. So thermal energy networks provide for neighborhood scale decarb. We have been talking about this throughout the presentation, so I'm sort of going to wrap up what everyone said, and then we'll have some time for discussion afterward. So TENS can accelerate decarbonization at scale. We need to be doing things beyond building by building. right? They could reduce the cost of new construction and retrofits for existing buildings, right, and new buildings. We can be enabling large-scale heat recovery from industrial resources, maybe, sort of like that Rockefeller Center project or the Chelsea Thermal Energy Network project that Adam shared. We can reduce the total cost of economy-wide electrification, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that. We never talk about climate action as being potential economic development. I think that's a key factor here. And we could provide for a positive net present value compared to alternatives. So what is neighborhood scale decarb, right? Just to step back. It's a strategy that focuses on an entire geographically focused area to optimize the interaction between the various infrastructure typologies, planned development, existing buildings, economic development goals, right? Shared infrastructure to achieve that neighborhood scale decarbonization. And so to advance neighborhood scale, we have to be following this RED approach, or resource efficient decarbonization. RED is a model that helps alleviate a lot of the difficulties that building owners face when they're attempting building-wide decarbonization. So there's 4 steps here within this process. Reducing energy loads as much as possible. Just because we're electrifying doesn't mean that efficiency isn't important. So strategically reduce loads, strategically reconfigure systems that allow for interoperability between thermal energy networks and buildings, and that's typically through low temperature distribution. We can't have steam in buildings, right? Or else we can't connect to a thermal energy network. Recover as much heat as possible from the building itself, whether that's from heat or wastewater, right? Or from neighboring buildings or other waste heat resources, and then incrementally replace over time. All or nothing is just a false assumption that we need to kind of put to bed. So here it is in another format, right? Reduce, recover, partial load,
the debrief on my Sarah visit, question mark?
Can you just go on mute, please? Partial load electrification and then full electrification, right? And then what does reconfigure mean at the neighborhood scale? So it means adapting infrastructure systems to optimally move heat from thermal energy resources and to buildings among even legacy district systems, for example. And so this image, courtesy of Building Decarbonization Coalition, is effectively sort of beginning to carve out what a marketplace looks like for thermal energy across a neighborhood, coming from multiple sources of heat or cooling, from storage at varying temperatures, between regulated investor-owned utilities or municipalities and merchants that might be supplying heat into the network and getting paid to do that. And we could talk a little bit more about that. So some policy mechanisms that we might want to implement in order to advance this work: permanent peak load reductions across the gas and the electric system, mandatory heat recovery. You know, there's a lot of talk about data centers and AI, where heat is purposefully wasted, right? Should we be allowing that in a future where we're trying to decarbonize? The idea that we're doing non-wires alternatives and managing electric demand across a grid in order to optimally expand that grid. Maybe we don't have to expand the grid so much or as much as we thought. Just skipping forward a little bit, strategic decarbonization investment zones that overlay economic development frameworks, right, in neighborhoods so that we're achieving multiple outcomes. I think that municipalities have a big role here, that they can be thermal energy network owners and developers, that they could work with the private sector in order to advance this work. Authorizing regulated investor-owned utilities. Yes, the incumbent utilities can also do this, as Adam shared. And then also that we can create and enforce a thermal energy marketplace. So similar to that image that I just showed you. So UTENJA, what is it? It's the Utility Thermal Energy Networks Act of 2022 in New York. What can we learn from that? We can learn that the regulatory framework can support a diversity of players, right? Private, regulated, municipal. We can create an open market, right? Regulated investor-owned utilities, they're not the only players. There's a whole role for a bunch of other folks out there that can serve this marketplace, including municipalities. campus and customer-owned systems, they're already there and they should be lightly regulated or exempted because they manage their own systems. And then perhaps investor-owned utilities should only be allowed to distribute thermal energy in pipes and not make or extract that thermal energy, sort of like how the electric system works, where the utility just moves the electrons, they don't produce the electrons. And so the more competition, the better, just in general. We need to be moving to least cost solutions. And system complexity does make this difficult, but we could look at other infrastructure systems, just like wastewater or the electric system, to get to the right space. So what's common carrier? What does that mean? Open access in a marketplace, right? Across a system. It's a regulatory framework, right, that could function within, that mimics open access electric systems or gas systems, where multiple providers or suppliers or prosumers, right? I don't know if you've ever heard that term, where someone could be a consumer and a supplier or a producer, to use that network to supply end-use customers. So imagine that thermal grid or even the electric grid in tandem, like a bathtub, where we're trying not to drown that little town that's inside the bathtub, but we're also trying to keep the level just at the right spot to make sure everyone is being appropriately served and everything is in balance. So what are some key takeaways here? We need many parties participating. We can't block folks out, right? We need to develop best practice standards, very important. Regulated utilities, they have a role, but they're not the only player. Municipalities might have the most important role. We need a democratic process that supports fairness and affordability, right? And that kind of hits back at the municipal. What's more democratic, the municipality or the Public Service Commission? And ask yourself that. So economic development and neighborhood scale decarbonization, right? These things work in tandem. One is the other. They can be the same. And this is sort of our North Star as well, right? As we're electrifying transportation and buildings, we have to keep thinking about how we're going to beat that electric demand peak. Today it happens in the summer. In the future, it might happen in the winter, right? Can we electrify our buildings and stay under that peak so that we don't have to build out that truly expensive grid and electric generating fleet, right, that serves maybe 15 minutes of demand? How do we optimize this and maximize this across the economy? And so what can you do? You could tell your policymakers now and the regulator that we don't have to radically expand the grid to meet electrification loads, right? That we can accelerate decarb and improve grid reliability, that we can choose the least cost solution. We might have to do a little bit more work identifying what that is, but we can choose it. We don't have to spend tons of money on this and kind of like hobble our economy just in furtherance of decarbonization. We can have it both ways. We can mandate the least cost solution. We can value thermal energy resources like we value electric resources. That includes battery storage, right? Power generation. Thermal energy storage could be valued in a similar way, and we can unlock a market for thermal energy. And so here we go. We're going to talk about some discussion here. And I think Barb might have some prompt questions for us in the panel. All right, am I back? Did everything work? Okay, we're here. We made it. So I don't know how everyone sort of reacted to the presentations. Obviously, there's a theme here that we need everybody if we're going to make this happen. Building decarbonization, especially across cities, is especially difficult. And so we need conveners, right? And sort of these middle managers to pull a lot of different parties together to make this kind of thing happen. So Debbie, I don't know if you could speak to some of the work that you're doing. I mean, I know that your slides were a little bit messed up, but maybe you want to go back to the importance of that workshop and that early stage stakeholder engagement in terms of pulling these different parties together to make action happen, identifying projects that might emerge out of that process. And you're on mute, so please come off mute.
Yeah, thanks. So our workshops, first of all, begin with people in a community that are interested. We don't go looking for people who want to hold a community workshop. They're finding us. They're people who have heard about thermal energy networks and want to find out what's possible where they are. So they're highly motivated. They tend to be people who have lived in their community for a long time or have served in their communities, and they have a lot of local knowledge about who the people are who should be invited to the workshop in the town, in the region, the business owners who might be waste heat producers and be very interested in selling any waste heat they have. So the workshops are, of course, about explaining what thermal energy networks are, but also about us learning about the community and where it could fit in. So that's where the stuff from the toolkit that I mentioned comes in. And we do a lot of that in person. We also start with helping people see heat differently and think about sharing heat. We talk about what they're trying to accomplish where they are and what their vision for their community is, so that we can then tailor whatever the thermal energy network project potential projects are that we discuss with them to what they already need. We look at big maps with them together, and they identify where heat could be being made and buildings that are close enough. A school that maybe is about to have to replace its boiler in the next year or two, or other needs that they have like that we otherwise wouldn't know. So the workshops are really critical in terms of not just engaging stakeholders and building trust, but actually finding out what is a workable, actionable, successful, hopefully, project.
I wonder if Jonathan could come back on real quick, because I've got a quick question for him. I think one of the things that kind of strikes me is, if you're obsessed with geothermal, you're going to walk around, carrying your geothermal hammer, and everything that you see is a borehole, right? Does it make sense to enter a community and try to figure out how to shoehorn the technology, or does the neighborhood tell you what the appropriate technology is? And maybe I'll ask Aaron that question, since he's the guy on the phone selling some technology.
Wait, so what's the question?
So does the neighborhood or the local conditions determine the appropriate technology, or do you try to find a spot for your technology? Why don't you go into that a little bit?
That's a chicken and the egg question. It really is.
Yeah.
I've seen it work both ways, quite frankly. I have always found that understanding the load, and actually there's a question, Omar put a really good question here about, and kind of I'll answer his question while I answer yours at the same time. I find that the projects are far more successful when you have a better understanding of what the load profile is, meaning like what kind of energy sources do I have available to me and what am I trying to meet? And then finding the proper mix of technologies and solutions and controls, what have you, to satisfy that load, as opposed to, hey, I've got this really great mousetrap. Let's go find a neighborhood to plant it in. So, because it does take a village. So again, we work really well with geothermal. Any type of hydronic solution, right? And air source heat pumps, again, if you're contributing to some kind of ambient loop, the more the merrier. And the more diverse those building types and load profiles are on that same loop, the more the loop itself kind of self-sustains. So I think it's best to find a neighborhood that has some ideal conditions. Like in my world, because I'm a wastewater guy, is there a big lift station, wastewater treatment plant, like I said, a brewery, some kind of like big hydronic energy source that we can use to heat source, heat sink? And then sure, then I'm like, okay, now let me see if I can find enough off takers around that user or that support, that source, to make a system work. But generally speaking, a neighborhood kind of presents its own unique fingerprint, if you will, that we then try to figure out what the best mix is. So I'm sorry if that was a roundabout answer, but it really does depend. The good news about our tech, because I can work in a small apartment building. I can work all the way up to, providing 180-degree water for 23 million square feet of space. Scalability is easy, right? You show me a neighborhood, we can generally find a mix of technologies. I bet Adam would agree with the same with, if he goes and looks at a town, a neighborhood, a campus, there's never one solution or one specific type of mix, but there's a mix that's going to work. Would you agree with that,
Right.
Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with everything you said. A couple things I'd add. The energy density is really important. So if you've got a really big town, but there's not a lot of energy density in there, you just have to build a really long pipe, and the economics of that start to erode a little bit. The other thing that's really helpful when you're looking at different opportunities that's not technical, try to deliver the thermal energy networks to people who want them. Because even if you have the best location for a thermal energy network and you can see the load is perfect and the resources are perfect, if those stakeholders don't want it, you're spinning your wheels and just go find another one. You can save a lot of time and a lot of resources avoiding those type of people and places.
And to that point, right, like how do they want them done is another factor as well, right? And so I know, Debbie, in your work, there's a lot of effort trying to determine what the business model is early on, or at least which business models are on the table in order to kind of find a project. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. We have been in situations where we found out that an affordable housing place just legally is not able to participate in a co-op. So that limits what's possible there. We also have municipalities we're working with that are very interested in a thermal energy network because the town manager or the municipal utility director are the ones who have reached out, the ones who have helped us host the workshop locally, and they are already on board. And then there are municipalities that want nothing to do with it, such as in West Union, Iowa, where the businesses that wanted to connect to a geothermal system needed to form their own LLC, member-owned LLC. The town leases the system to them, but they're the ones that run it and they're the ones who benefit from it. So there's all sorts of pathways depending on what's acceptable.
And that goes back to the democratic governance too. I just wanted to call that out, right? The member-owned LLC, all the members have a vote and they determine how the system functions and expands or not. So it's almost sort of like a co-op, but it's not. They actually have shares in an LLC. Adam,
There
really
is no,
yeah,
I was going to say, there is no Dominic Toretto in this scenario. Like, this is not Fast and the Furious. Everything is just, it's slow, it's plodding along, and it's getting the work done the right way.
So question for Adam, right? So on the Chelsea project, right, there's a question in the chat about 2 anchor tenants for this system, like as if they're bookends. And then there's a pipe that's connecting the thermal energy resource, which is the data center, to the existing housing, which, the plan is to replace all of that housing with very large scale redevelopment. So what's there currently, like, will be multiplied by, I think, like it's 6x. So could you speak to how you would go about sort of sizing that pipe in order to enable growth?
Yeah. So just quick clarifying comment based on that message. It's not a microgrid electrically. It's a thermal energy network. So it's sort of like a thermal microgrid. But there's no electrical connection established between the two other than the traditional utility. But the idea is to add intermediate customers between those 2 points. There's a Google building just south of it, which we have our eye on. The development that Jared was referencing, we have our eye on. I'm going to be diplomatic in answering the question. Everything is oversized to the extent that we can be and remain financially responsible for the ratepayers of who are paying for this. So we're doing what we can, but you obviously can't build a pipe that's meant for something in 50 years just because it wouldn't be financially responsible at this point. So there are some pieces of equipment, some pipes that are oversized, not as much as you want for a system that we're anticipating in 50 years. But we're hoping that the phasing of this project can allow us to use that equipment for decades to come and add on additional features to it. So the future planning of that entire system is one of the pillars of that project and the deliverables to Con Ed and PSC.
I actually want to hit on that point a little bit. So like, I don't know if folks know how regulated investor-owned utilities get their return for their shareholders, but they get it when they deploy capital into the system to expand the system. So if we have a condition where we're expecting a lot more electric load, whether that's AI or EVs or building electrification, and the regulated investor-owned utility is sort of like licking its lips a little bit because it could deliver more spending for the shareholders to get their return. Is there a perverse incentive there? So is there another path that mandates least cost so that we could achieve the same outcome, but not with gold-plated systems? And what does that mean for the regulated investor-owned utility and their model? What does it mean for municipalities and all these players that have to potentially come together to deliver that best case scenario for the ratepayers? So those are just some questions that I think everybody on the call should be thinking about. So I think we do not have much more time for this section. We're going to jump over to a panel of folks that are here to represent New Jersey. I'm just going to share my screen one more time. I really hope this works. Is it working? Can someone please tell me?
You're good.
Cool. So here to introduce David Zimmer. He's the executive director of the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank. We have Melissa Miles, executive director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. John Rotolo, chief engineer of the Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission. This is one of the largest sewer systems in North America. Dan Kennedy, CEO of the New Jersey chapter of NIOP. We'll turn it over to Barb for a lively discussion and reaction to this panel.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much to that panel. I know we're all coming at this from different levels of experience with the topic of thermal energy networks. And whether you were a beginner or you've been doing this for a long time, that was a great panel to learn from because they're doing cutting edge work in the Northeast. So I want to, let's just turn it over to our panel. We have David Zimmer, Melissa, John, and Dan. And maybe each of you can say a few words about what you heard and what your thoughts are, just your initial reactions. What's this mean for New Jersey? Let's start with David.
Hi, Barb. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. So the Infrastructure Bank is a state authority that works with the DEP, we work with the DOT, we work with the Office of Emergency Management. We've got different financing programs that we've been authorized by the state to co-administer with each of those representative agencies. We've got a 40-year partnership with the DEP where we help administer the state revolving fund. Just think of the large water projects that get done in the state. That's our business in doing the legal, the credit, the financing, and providing those funds at very, very low costs to the different water systems throughout the state. It's a very, very intriguing discussion. If you think about the work that the Infrastructure Bank does, we do size projects. Our average project is, I think last year was a little bit more than $6 million. Our largest project was well north of $150 million. So we're doing cities and we're doing counties. Neighborhoods, we've not really done before. So I was very interested coming into this to think, well, how do you break this down to do a section of Newark, right? Or a small town that is a part of a county utility authority. And so, the very, very first example in New York City, I'm thinking, well, you got a lot of concentration of both customers as well as potential off-takers. I wish I was New York City. It would be a lot easier. So I don't know how how we might, I'd love to get in a conversation with any of your panelists and figure out with them how we might be able to manage a project that is, for a specific neighborhood and figure out how to fund it. I would say that we're going to have a couple of hurdles because the way we're set up, we're allowed to finance. We've done a number of CHPs, right, throughout the state. And anybody that knows anything about a CHP, you need a certain volume of wastewater treatment per day in order to justify the cost of the CHP, right? So they're relatively large systems. And so how do you take that technology like the folks at SHARC are doing and bring that down into a much, much smaller plan that instead of handling 500,000 customers handles, let's say 5,000, right? I was particularly interested, and I'll stop after this. I was particularly interested in the example that Aaron gave with the numbers on it, right? Like, so I saw the operating, but I really didn't see how they're financing the build out the $8 million and the number of customers that it would take to pay for that. But that's really more of a conversation offline instead of boring everybody else with those kind of particular details. But I would love to dig into this deeper because I'd love to find a way to get involved, have the iBank involved in some of these projects.
Okay, we're going to go to Melissa. Melissa, did you have some initial reactions?
Hi, Barb, thanks. So yes, I'm Melissa Miles. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, and we're a statewide organization, and we work with communities and community-based organizations in New Jersey's overburdened communities, helping communities to basically vision a way through the legacy of environmental pollution that the state bears, as well as the threats posed by climate change. So from that perspective, I'm always going to be looking at these types of conversations from the perspective of communities and the benefits for communities, not just financial benefits, but reduced pollution load, which is sort of our starting place. Our history has been in looking at emissions reductions from the energy sector. We have like 20 years of, looking at environmental policy, specifically from that lens. How does it reduce pollution load in communities? And so, where you have reduced pollution load, I'm on board, right? So, if we're talking about, first of all, reducing pollution load from energy generation in households, whether it be heating, cooling, so on and so forth, that's definitely a benefit. I loved how Debbie talked about folks being able to hang on, communities being able to hang on to energy dollars and what that means in the long run. So it's not only households seeing this reflected in energy bills, which we know in New Jersey is very important right now. The cost of energy is, one of the number one things that advocates like myself, words like electrification have become sort of like bad language because no one wants to talk about that alongside of increased energy bills. So when you can talk about hanging on to energy dollars, you're going to gain ears. And that through hanging on to those dollars, we could see more opportunities for development of housing in communities that do need, more low and moderate income housing. So that was something that definitely stood out to me. I think Jared talked about the importance also of reducing energy load. The cleanest energy is the energy not used. So, where we can be coupling the energy networks with energy efficiency in homes, that's also, things that are going to make the quality of life better in communities that have been historically burdened by pollution and energy infrastructure. And then, some other things that stood out to me are community involvement, talking about the project in Sunset Park. And, we have a partner, EJ organization in Sunset Park called Uprose. We've been following their work very closely in that community, everything from the redevelopment of their waterfront to their offshore wind. And so I'm really glad to hear about projects like this being developed there. And, definitely interested in how communities can be pulled into the planning and the implementation, and how it's absolutely necessary. For the first time, we see energy systems where you must have stakeholders at the table. I don't know that this has ever been the case, right? You just move into a house and you connect with, whatever utility is, services that neighborhood, and that's that. You have no choice. So, to have a system where, folks have to be bought in and have to have a say in how it's developed is really important and moves us towards equity, right, in these energy systems. Yeah, so, and then I guess the last thing that also stood out to me is the potential ability, which I hadn't thought about before, and I think Jared mentioned this, which is to ease off the grid, because we know, so much is dependent on our ability to tap into the grid. And, there's just so much could be said there, but where we can, ease off of that demand and yet still push forward clean energy systems, that's going to also be really exciting. I'll stop there. Thanks.
There's a lot that we are hearing from all of that. Thank you, Melissa. So, John, why don't you tell us from the perspective of PVSC what you heard today?
Yes, I heard a lot of good discussions on the challenges with implementing a regional solution. I submitted a Department of Energy grant to do something just like this, and I worked with Aaron on that for the Newark corridor we had. As I listened to everybody talk, the biggest thing I got out of it is how you implement it, right? This is a large scale. How do people put their hands around something like this, right? And I think the best takeaway I had is you got to identify the need, right? If you don't have somebody that wants to buy into a system like this, then, you have to move on. I mean, you have to have stakeholders that want to invest in a regional type solution like this, and have off-takers. We have plenty of wastewater, and I'm going to say it's a wasted resource when it can be used as a positive. And, I think education is part of that you have to educate the community on how this wasted resource could be used to save them money and really bring a holistic solution to regional electrification, right? Everybody wants to do good for the environment, but when you tell them that their electric bills are going to go up because of electrification, they're not as favorable towards that. But if you have a solution, which would be this, thermal sources that is otherwise wasted, to provide that solution on a regional scale for electrification, I think more people would be interested in that. Especially, I thought somebody had some data centers, which would be great to take advantage of that type of opportunity. I did like what Dave Zimmer said about, probably getting projects and figuring out ways to fund this, because everything starts with the funding mechanisms. And if there could be a way to fund this, there would be more people looking to invest in this type of regional infrastructure. So that's what I heard, is very good discussion, and it's exciting, actually. And I think this is how a regional electrification can be done. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, and wrap up, we have Dan Kennedy, the CEO of NIOP. So, Dan, what are your thoughts?
Good afternoon. NIOP's the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. We're very strong in New Jersey, but we have a North American presence, including chapters in Canada. We represent all asset classes of commercial real estate, including everyone's favorite industrial, which is essentially warehouses, data centers, et cetera. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. It's a little cliche, but my members are the time is money people. But they also like to avoid costs. And so, the one thing that was said earlier about the avoiding the costs of chillers and other things that are kind of built into classic buildings, that could be really valuable to my members. I think it's really hard to retrofit big older buildings. A little bit easier when we're talking about new construction with high efficiency accoutrements. So I think that's something that really stood out. I'd be curious to see if there's any money available for this, how we would interact with other aspects of the capital stack to do a project. Obviously, this is going to be one slice of the pie to construct, projects that are in the tens of millions of dollars. So it was mentioned that classically it's that mush market that is the focus. Thinking about industrial real estate, that's oftentimes close to or approximate to waste heat sources. There may be some opportunities there to co-locate in areas where there's already kind of an industrial focus, and we can actually do better work together to decarbonize and reduce emissions in these areas we know have really challenges for the existing residents there. So that might be a great opportunity. There are some projects coming along in places like Hoboken. There's a project one of our members is going forward on. Elcor is the sponsor. They're doing the largest geothermal in New Jersey, in Hoboken. It's part of the New Jersey Transit kind of partnership project there, right at the waterfront. So that's something that's interesting. But that was a, 6 to 8 year, if not longer, project. So engaging with local government can be, hold anyone who's on local boards, hold your ears, but it can be brutal, even for good projects. So again, back to the time is money part. My members would be interested in see, how as these projects materialize and become options, we probably aren't willing to wait around for 10, 20 years for this to kind of get all figured out. If there are state money available or federal money available, I would just like to put in, and Dave Zimmer didn't ask me to say this, but the iBank has a great reputation for delivering on projects. And we would prefer to see any state relationship with the private or public sector be done through the iBank and not other state agencies. I just want to report out that we have made progress in industrial real estate with the community solar program. Rooftops on warehouses, other industrials, and that's definitely a better connection with the community. It's definitely prioritized to lower income residents and making their transition to lower carbon fuels is kind of a little bit more a little bit better for them. So if our goal is decarbonization and redevelopment, which I think is a big deal in New Jersey, most of our members are focused on redevelopment and not greenfield development. 40 years ago, I don't know that I could work here, but right now, in terms of my personal North Star, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to redevelop the built environment in New Jersey with not just industrial, but mixed-use multifamily, revisioning office parks in suburban areas. There's a tremendous opportunity in New Jersey, and I'm just grateful to be a part of the conversation, and I'd love to stay in touch and see where this goes.
Okay, so we have a lot of ideas coming from 4 different perspectives in New Jersey, and we have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you to give me a specific next step. I have a lot of ideas about what we can do to follow up on this webinar, and we do want to thank, first, let me take a minute before we end, thanking the panel, this wonderful group, David Zimmer, Melissa Miles, John Rotolo, and Dan Kennedy, and Jonathan Thompson, Debbie New, Adam Shelly, Aaron Miller, and Jared, who organized this whole thing. And he did a fabulous job of bringing us some of the best people in the country who are working on this. And they're very interested in New Jersey. So let me just end by asking each of you for one next step that you think would be helpful to move this conversation forward.
So do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
All right. So I would say, as a state authority, we are governed by a statute that is proposed by the legislature, signed into law by the governor. I'm not allowed to do anything outside of my statute. So I'm going to need to ask the legislature to allow me to do some of these projects. In order to do that, I need to understand the financing better, and I would love any of the individuals that spoke, if they have a financial model, please connect with me. I need to continue this conversation.
Great, thank you. Melissa, one thing we should do next.
Yeah, I think folks are putting forth some important next steps. So, what I'll say is, to me, these are really local solutions, notwithstanding the funding has to often come from other places, but because they're local solutions, we need to see more information on where it's happening already. So, some of the presenters talked about, Hoboken and other places where we have pilot projects. We need more information to get to communities so that they can start having these conversations with local stakeholders.
Okay. John.
Yes, I agree with Melissa. I'm going to say education and information are the key. Most people don't know about what's available to them. So I think that would be a good step in the right direction, that people understand, what is available to help them achieve their end goal.
And Dan, you go last.
I'd say find a competent local government and or local utility, and try to pilot this out and demystify it. And so it's not just an academic exercise, but something that unfortunately us New Jerseyans don't trust anything that doesn't happen in our state. So let's get a pilot project in New Jersey, prove the concept, and then market the hell out of it.
Okay, Jared, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is probably just in the vein of the pilot project, convene a neighborhood that's willing to explore this with key stakeholders and municipal support, and then a project will emerge out of that. There's opportunities everywhere, and I already know, of one that we kind of talked about in Newark, potentially, but they're everywhere. I mean, what was described earlier is something that is not specifically replicable, right? It's not like a specific product that gets just applied everywhere in the same way. It's a replicable approach. Just like how real estate developers, come in and provide transit-oriented development, or, how anything else happens on the municipal level and with communities. So New Jersey's really good at infrastructure and development near train stations. I have a feeling this is something that they could be also really good at doing.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who joined. We had a lot of people joining us today. We are going to share the slides, and we will share the recording, and we will be doing follow-up. So be in touch. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Barb.
Thanks.